So I'm one of 5 from Windsor, Ontario, and my biological father, was Native, and always shared from a very young age, from the time I can remember. I feel like I remember him holding me in his arms when I was born, saying, "You're Indian, and don't ever let anybody tell you different." And I didn't, I don't really pay attention. You don't pay attention as you're growing up what that message means, right? Like, little tiny things. Those were I think I had about 3 messages from him, were just like, those messages came forward in my life today. So I have to acknowledge that, telling me that I was Indian at a young age, I didn't know anything else. And then also for my mother to not choose the religion for us. And we had no idea what that meant, but we didn't choose our religion individually until we were older. And then the other one is just being true to who you are. And all of those things resonated with me my whole life. And I think that was a big part of why I do what I do today. But anyway, he unfortunately passed away at 52, and he was intergenerational trauma of suicide and plagued with alcoholism. His mother passed away at 42, and her mother passed away at 29. And so the history, I didn't know any of this until in the last 15 years of my life, but we knew based on what my mother told us, and I love sharing that. She shared this message with us, was that your father was the most compassionate and loving, talented. He could pick up any instrument and play it by ear. He could sing. He was an artist, but she said, I didn't understand his pain. And so he was a severe alcoholic from a very young age and went through foster care. And he has his story that I was very lucky to have been able to contact the CAS over the last 15 years. And they provided me with his whole history of what his journey was through CAS. And that actually was an amazing journey for myself, because after I started to learn more about my family history, I was really angry with the people involved, my step grandfather who adopted my father. And so there are a lot of really, small details that I found out in my the last 15 years of my life. And I'm so grateful that we have services like that would hold on to these records so that we can really connect with our history. So when I found out I was pregnant, it was like, whoa, what am I going to share with my family? And my husband's family, they had their beliefs, which even my husband didn't believe in, so it was like, okay, what are we going to teach our children? I think going through the stages of, being married, and then, you're pregnant, and, you just start to venture into this next stage in your life where you feel like I have to figure out, they say removing the onion peels, right? Let's remove this and see what's there and how'd that show up. And so I became more reflective and more conscious and more, returning back to that nurturing of I have a human being in my body kind of thing. And so I started this just kind of reflecting, and I actually began yoga. And my yoga instructor was the conduit for me. She led me to a retreat, and she didn't know anything about my background. And I went as a helper in the kitchen. And when I was driving there, I could feel this vibration it's about time. It was like this voice telling me, come, we're waiting for you, we're waiting for you. And so that's, when I got there, it was land up in Caledon that has been just nurtured with the Indigenous understanding and beliefs and values. And it was beautiful. And I could hear voices there. I could see things, people, and it just was like, I came back home and I was like, okay, I think I'm losing my mind. Because, I was just had a baby, so I'm thinking, am I going crazy? Am I post-traumatic? But it was like from the time I visited there, it was like, oh no, you made it. Now you understand. And that was when everything started making sense to me. In the journey from the time that I moved to Windsor to being with my husband to building, I always had this inner voice that was telling me, you need to check in. You have to stay balanced somewhere. And so all of it started to make sense because I thought I was just dreaming a lot of times and just having these dreams. And I remember even saying to my husband some nights that I have this dream about my dad, and I would tell him things that happened, and he's like, oh, yeah. And then I would go home and I would tell my mom, and she would say, oh, that doesn't surprise me. And so it was just like everything started to show up for me. So I started to do research, and I started to go online, and I knew nothing. I didn't understand what my father said, so I pulled up the Indian Act. I'd never heard of the Indian Act. Just my older brother is a huge historian, an advocate, knows everything about everything. And he's like, well, you should know this. And so I would sit, and I'm saying probably hours, if it wasn't days, like hours, I would stay up all night and just read. And I really truly felt when I would find information anywhere, I felt like my grandmother was standing right there. My grandmother and my father, there was always like that balance of the people, that are supposed to be sharing this with me. So I started tracing and connecting, and I contacted Six Nations because I felt like I knew that that's where my family was from. And I had an uncle who was estranged for a while. He's the last blood relative of my father. It was just like anytime I would ask for clarity on something, it was like it would just show up. I showed up at the band office on Six Nations another day, and I had, by this time, my uncle had provided me with genealogy work that he had done. So he did census forms, and I actually had paper to show me who my ancestors were. And so I showed up with this book, and it was pretty funny because I just walked into this place that obviously has a purpose, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I walked in and I was like, hey, this is my family, and I want to find them, and I hear you have all the information here. And she was like, are you status, and do you have a card? And I said, no, but these are my family. And she said, well, get in line, but she knew that it was the second or third time that I was there. And she said, but you know what, I'm going to give you a name of someone. And so she wrote down the name of this person and said, call her. And so I reached out and I called this lady, and she said, oh, come and see us at the genealogy group we do at Ancestral Voices on Six Nations. So I said, you know what, I have to do this. So I went back like 4 times. And I remember walking in, and they had a tree painted on the wall, and everybody looked the same. They looked like my dad, It smelled like him. It smelled like just this. It was nostalgic for me. It was like, I remember the first time walking into the space, I heard, you're here, you made it. And I would say, Dad, come sit with me. We're doing this work together. So the 4th time I broke down. I was like getting ready to leave, and I was crying, and I was like, I'm not making progress. And, and all of a sudden I looked up, and there were 4 elders standing in front of me. And I was like, what? What's up? They said, girl, what can we help you with? And I said, I just want to find my family. I don't even know where to start. I've been here, and and they go, well, why don't you ask her? And so the person that facilitates it, they brought her over, and they said, Renee, help Jody find her family. And so she put her hand on my shoulder, and she was like, well, who are you? And I said, well, that's my great grandma. And I pointed to the lady at the bottom of the list of census forms. And she's like, that's my grandma. And she pointed to the lady above my grandma. And they were sisters, which made us cousins. And she's everything that I dreamed of, all the dreams I was having of my, that my family was this and we were doing that. And I'm doing this work for a reason. And to find out that this woman is there, and she said, my mother, before she passed, said, you need to find the women in our family. And she said, so I created this circle to find you. And so you're here. And so it was like surreal. I was driving home, and I was like, oh my, what? This is crazy. It's crazy. But it was magic, and it was fun. And it still is going on. I actually work with her. She's grooming me. I'm her helper. We travel, we do ceremony, we do whatever it is that I feel I need in my community. She comes to me. She doesn't make me go to her. Whenever I need her, she's here. She comes. What do you need? And it's amazing. It's the magic that she has showed me. And she said, I called her after, And I said, well, what's next? And she said, oh, just keep listening. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Our grandmas are dancing together and they're making this happen. And so I looked at my husband, I was like, this is real. My cultural beliefs and values are real. You know, they tell us to connect to your spirit. And if you listen to your spirit, you will hear what your responsibility is to yourself. And when you take care of yourself, you're able to serve others. And that's our job, is to serve the community. When all of the truth and reconciliation was happening, I was like, I knew nothing about it, right? Because I was in it. I was living in the essence of my Indigenous beliefs. So I was just telling people what I was doing and how, and even my hair clients and my friends, even my bra business, because I'm doing all this stuff. And so I started really showing up to these, events that were happening in the schools and in the community. And the government has put a lot of money in, moving forward in the reconciliation. And so I wanted to understand that more. So, I would do as much research as possible. So I would go to the actual events to say, okay, I'm gonna go right to the people and say, tell me everything that's happening. Right? I deserve to know. I'm an Indigenous woman in the community, and how many other Indigenous people are showing up to ask these questions. And with the process of learning, and a nation learning, and so learning all of these beliefs about my culture has been through just saying, I want more. I want more. And it's led me to opportunities today in the community to share with non-Indigenous people, right? That don't have belief systems, but we're in a part of this system in the last 100 years, right? They still watched it. They were still a part of it. The way that our Indigenous people think is that it's all about vibration. So you may not have been in the actual act of it, but you were in the community that was happening. Everybody has remembering. It all makes sense. So if our belief system is that, then people need to wake up to say, I think I'd like to hear a bit more about this belief system that can support me to live in an honorable way. To me, success is being true to your true self, speaking your voice in any situation when you feel vulnerable, looking for truth. Truth is huge. Truth can be very different to everyone. But I think that just knowing that you are what's important in the world. And I think that if you really believe that you're supposed to be something and do something bigger, doesn't matter how big it is, everything around you, one of the things that I always say to my children that our culture really promotes is that the teachings that I've received anyway, is that there will always be that resistance to break through to where you need to go. And that's the balance, right? That's the harmony in life. There will always be something there to make sure that you are completely honoring yourself. You'll always be challenged.